We're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So many, on this days, so many classic movies that we look back in time and say, wow, I can't believe such and such a movie is that old, or wow, that's a cool trivia tidbit that it came out at the same time as a different famous movie. But on this day, 1982, in a very, very competitive summer movie season, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner opened in theaters and bombed, despite the fact that there were already critics even seeing a version of the film which is not really what Ridley Scott intended, hit the masterpiece button, was already being lauded by numerous leading critics upon release, top 5 greatest science fiction films ever made. There were a lot of critics who didn't like it, thought it was slow, it was boring, we were expecting an exciting movie. Blade Runner has moments of excitement. It has moments where it plays like a thriller, plays like a suspense film. It's not really a thriller, it's not a suspense film, and sure as fuck isn't an action movie. What it is, in my opinion, the greatest science fiction film in the history of cinema. That is another hill that I will go down on. Come at me, bro. But Blade Runner, that was not the title of Philip K. Dick's original novel. Among many things Philip K. Dick was famous for, titles of his books. Total Recall, remember that one with Arnold? They remade it with Colin Farrell. I love Colin, but the movie was a piece of shit. They did not do a good job adapting the material as well as Paul Verhoeven and me, and Sharon Stone was so hot in that movie. Total Recall, the book which became easily a top 3 greatest Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. There are plenty of people that will put it above Terminator 2 if we're purely talking science fiction. That part is neither here nor there. Total Recall, Philip K. Dick's original novel, was what? We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. It's actually probably a better title than Total Recall. We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. Blade Runner, the book's title was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Big difference. Dare I say, in both instances, if the eventual movie had been called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, I mean, the film bombed anyway, would have bombed worse. And I don't believe that it would have developed the cult following that it wound up developing if it was titled Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Any more so than Arnold Schwarzenegger in his fucking absolute prime, where his next movie was Terminator, well, no, actually Kindergarten Cop, and then Terminator 2. I want you to see my movie. We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. So much entertainment and excitement. We killed about 84 people, but they're not all humans. There's some Martians in there, some mutants. More or less. Blade Runner had a torturous, circuitous route to production. Now, there are people who would say, well, it bombed because the production was bullshit. I don't buy that for a second. I don't believe that all of the production issues, the fact that the studio and some of the producers were in disagreement with Ridley Scott over the whole point of the film, that's not why it bombed. Sometimes in cinema, you simply are released on the wrong weekend, the wrong point of the summer. Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan and Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial were in theaters when Blade Runner opened. People who were going to see Sci-Fi were more likely to see those two films, even with Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones himself. The first Raiders of the Lost Ark had been the previous year. Han Solo, Star Wars episodes 4 and 5 were already in people's memory banks, and people loved him. But the film, the trailer made it seem like it wasn't an action movie, and preview screenings came away bewildered because we thought we were getting another Han Solo, Indiana Jones, and instead we got some kind of cerebral, intellectual sci-fi, which is very slow. The movie is only slow if you have preconceived notions that it is going to be up-tempo, James Cameron-esque action thriller. It's not. It was never going to be. Ridley Scott's entire process and the production team and even the studio people involved with whom he clashed, they all knew what he was doing. He hired people like Sid Mead, who was known as a visual futurist. His job was to try to reasonably figure out what might Los Angeles look like in 2019. What would the Bradbury building look like in 50 years in Los Angeles? Is it going to rain all the time? How dystopian are we talking about? Can we use computers? Are we just going to do all of the effects as models, miniatures, matte paintings with very little CGI? Well, it wasn't called CGI back then. There's no green screen in this film. Most of the effects are production effects, mechanical, practical, special effects. Visually, it may be the most beautiful film ever made. Another hill I'll go down on. You won't be able to tell if you don't know what's a process shot, what's a model, what's a miniature. Everything looks like it's built to scale. The genius of Ridley Scott. But Blade Runner is a movie that if you go in cold, if you go in thinking it's something else, you're not going to like it. I thought the film was boring as hell. First 3 times I watched it. I kept waiting for something to happen. I didn't get the character of Roy Batty. I didn't understand, like Deckard's process wasn't really that clear. There was just a lot of stuff that had me scratching my head. I was impatient. It is not a movie for impatient people. But then again, neither is 2001: A Space Odyssey. Neither is A Clockwork Orange. Star Wars, you don't need a lot of patience. And technically, Star Wars is science fiction. If you want to ask me the question, is Star Wars more entertaining? No shit. The worst Star Wars movie is more, well, okay, not Attack of the Clones or even Revenge of the Sith. But you understand, there is intellectual sci-fi, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And then there is emotional sci-fi, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Then there are movies that manage to do both, what I just said. Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, which I will argue is the best Star Trek film ever made. I love Chris Pine and, the reboot generation. They're all great. Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan is a cerebral sci-fi that has incredible emotion and heart and weight to it. That happens to be a phenomenal film. That's the best of both worlds. Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan to me is so good that it holds its own with maybe not Star Wars episodes 4 and 5, but every other Star Wars film. Different, I know, Star Wars isn't Star Trek, no shit. But that is a film that I can always revisit. It has the moments of excitement, the suspense, the fucking great, hammy, over-the-top performances by both William Shatner and the late, great Ricardo Montalban. Just chewing it up. And to see 2 notorious scene chewers in opposition, I mean, it's fucking gold. It is gold. Gone! Gone, you bloodsucker! Kirk, you're still alive, my old... Still! Oh, friend. You managed to kill just about everyone else, but like a poor marksman, you keep missing the target. There's nothing like that in Blade Runner. But Blade Runner, as it turned out, was a movie that came out at the right time historically, not the week to week, because there were different areas of the summer of 1982 which if Blade Runner had landed, it would have been a bigger hit. Now, I've looked at the numbers, and there seems to be some disagreement over exactly how much Blade Runner turned on its initial theatrical run. I've seen as much as $41 million. The budget was around 30 plus. But I've also seen that it grossed in the 20s. So I don't think that anybody is 100% sure. I don't know anybody. My dad was a CPA. I didn't work on the books on that film. And it had nothing to do with it, I promise you. But the film did tank. It was just up against the wrong kind of competition in the wrong summer at the wrong time. And it was the wrong kind of movie. It wasn't going to get great word of mouth from your basic sci-fi crowd. Where something like E.T., I saw E.T. in theaters. My parents took me to see it. That's the kind of movie that had great buzz. My parents were told by several friends, you got to take Jeremy to see this movie. Took so-and-so. We all loved it. We thought it was a movie for kids. It's a movie for everybody. Pauline Kael, a notorious crank of a film critic who hated everything, seemingly, had a soft spot for Brian De Palma, defended some of his weaker works, really liked Spielberg, loved Scorsese's talent. She called E.T., great quote, the most moving science fiction film ever created on Earth. She had issues with Blade Runner. She would give a very deep review, but ultimately she was down on it. Looks incredible. I love Ridley. The vision is great. Story falls flat. Too bad, so sad. But historically, when Blade Runner is one of the first movies to gain a following, a cult following, and to gain traction specifically on home video. And it's a very important point to ponder. There was a time not long before 1983 when Blade Runner landed on home video. There was no home video. There was nothing. You saw a movie in theaters. Maybe there'd be a revival, but you saw a movie in theaters or you saw it on, well, first broadcast television and then HBO. The advent of Betamax, the advent of VHS, the ultimate advent of Laserdisc, which never caught on the way that it was expected to, made it possible for people to rediscover films that weren't playing on TV frequently, weren't going back into theaters. And Blade Runner, as luck would have it, probably the earliest film, because it hit video in 1983, just as the VHS, VCR, Betamax market was heating up, and Laserdisc was in preparation at that time. So Blade Runner, this kind of somewhat stiff, distant, difficult to penetrate narrative of, okay, it's 2019 Los Angeles, and Harrison Ford is playing, he's kind of a cop. They're called Blade Runners because he's a specific kind of cop. His job is to find these sort of renegade robots called replicants and put them out of commission, retire them. You can't really say kill. I mean, you could, but they don't use the word kill because they're not human. They're robots, but they look like human. Or as the president of the Tyrell Corporation, Eldon Tyrell, says, more human than human. That's our motto. It is not a coincidence that in Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I believe is the closest antecedent in terms of how it deals with messages of humanity and what it means to be human, in the world of that film, the computer, literally the fucking computer, HAL, has more human characteristics than the human characters. And in the world of Blade Runner, you have people who are presented as human beings who have less emotion, less passion, less will to live than the created beings, the replicants. This all went way over my head, watching it on HBO at age 13 and being bored to tears. I did not become an unabashed fan of the movie Blade Runner until reading Paul Salmon's book, which came out in the mid-1990s. So I was in film school. My horizons were being broadened in every possible way. But his book, Future Noir, I will say that in my not only movie going or movie learning, my history, cinematic history focused academic life in school and out of school, the two books that I recommend most highly for people who are interested in how Hollywood works and doesn't work, interested in the real inner workings of the movie business as far as actually mounting a big scale Hollywood production. Book number 1, Julie Salamon's The Devil's Candy, which I've discussed on the channel, on the making of Tom Wolfe's runaway best-selling novel, Bonfire of the Vanities, and the somewhat cinematic catastrophe that took place despite the best of intentions. That is the best behind-the-scenes book ever written about Hollywood. It is jaw-dropping. And it all happened. It was all reported at the time. Everyone and everything in that book is verified. None of the book's veracity was ever questioned. It happened exactly the way Salomon lays it out because she was behind the scenes with Brian De Palma. She had unlimited access to Tom Hanks, to Bruce Willis, to Melanie Griffith. Melanie really was not that into it. The other book is Paul Samon's Future Noir, which explains why there are so many cuts of Blade Runner floating around and how, depending on which version of the movie you see, spoiler alert, Harrison Ford's prime character, the protagonist, Rick Deckard, he's either a human being or he's not a human being. Oh, that's a big fucking difference. And I was personally very surprised that Harrison Ford came back for the Ryan Gosling 2017 film, Blade Runner 2049, because Harrison, although he would accept compliments, he didn't get angry when people said, Harrison, I think Blade Runner is the best film you ever made. Harrison was never satisfied with his performance, and he didn't like the idea that Rick Deckard might be a replicant because he said, well, you don't really have anyone to root for if he's just another robot. And Ridley was kind of going for the irony because a famous line by Harrison is, how does it not know what it is? Well, now you're getting into Total Recall territory. Arnold Schwarzenegger's Doug Quaid has memories of an existence that didn't exist. Implants, same idea. Again, the same author, Philip K. Dick, working with similar concepts. In Blade Runner, the idea of false memories, memory caps, implanted memories, they're both very important to the stories, but from a different angle. Because we're presented in a different way. And in Total Recall, the characters are not robots. That's not really the issue. For all of that, the matters of the plot, not critically important. You focus on what the characters want and why. And my early viewings of the film, when I did not love the movie, I just didn't understand the character of Roy Batty and how there were people describing him as an anti-hero. How? Spoiler alert, as far as I'm concerned, he just kills everybody. How is he not a villain? Well, he wants more life, fucker, as he puts it. Why do I have to die? Why did you build me this way? Why didn't you build me to last? He's asking questions of his creator. We ask the same questions. Whoop. The point, younger me missed it, but after reading Paul Samon's book, Future Noir, those two books, The Devil's Candy by Julie Salomon and Future Noir by Paul Samon, you can literally find them both in every library, every library. That is how important they are to the understanding, the business and commerce and art, making motion pictures. But after reading that book, I watched the movie again, and all of a sudden, I realized that, what the fuck did I do? This movie is unbelievable. This is phenomenal. Every scene, there is so much visual information. And almost every scene makes you question and wonder, what does it mean to be human? Because there's got to be more than just having a human mother and a human father. Yeah, it makes you human. There's got to be more. If the robots are asking the same questions as the human, mind-blowing stuff. And so after reading that book and watching the film again, now Ridley Scott put out a so-called director's cut in the early 90s, which was closer to what he was trying to do originally. And there is so much detail in the book, Future Noir, not just about the various cuts, but the precise differences. The theatrical version, the studio was convinced that the audience would not be able to follow it because Ridley wanted to have that art cinema feel where it's not spoon-feeding the audience. And Ridley is one of those filmmakers who always said, and Christopher Nolan has talked about this too, I trust that an audience that would come to a movie like this is smart enough to follow a story like this. We don't have to spoon-feed them. This was something where Ridley and Harrison were in agreement. Harrison didn't think that a voiceover was necessary. Neither did Ridley. Studio made him record a voiceover. And spoiler alert, the theatrical cut of Blade Runner had what you would call a happy ending. Not going to spoil it. Ridley always intended it to be more of an art cinema, up to your interpretation, open ending. He doesn't beat you over the head with the idea Rick Deckard's probably a replicant. He must be an older model. That's why he has difficulty in hand-to-hand combat with the Nexus 6 replicants. He's an older model. He's more like a regular person. He's not more human than human. You might say that he's closer to a human. He does not have super strength. He's smart. He's tough as nails. The director's cut, and now what is known as the final cut, the print was cleaned up, and Ridley was able to remove the voiceover and do what he did. It's more definitive, but it's still not telling you. But Harrison Ford, in his quite extraordinary movie career, I believe his single finest moment on screen comes at the end of Blade Runner, where he does something very simple. He looks at a tiny piece of sculpture, tiny piece of handcrafted sculpture that someone he works with has left at a scene, not even a crime scene. He's just, one of his coworkers has left behind. And Harrison looks at it. And if we're paying attention, we in the audience understand the importance of this little piece of sculpture. That character has information about Harrison Ford. Decided not to act on it. Could have. He's just basically telling Harrison, I know what you are, pal. It's okay. I'm going to look the other way. Don't worry about it. You're fine. When Harrison comprehends what he's looking at, he doesn't break the fourth wall. He simply nods his head in almost a disgusted fashion. He nods his head. That's it. That simple nod of the head, my favorite Harrison Ford actor moment. And notice how I didn't spoil anything. It's just a nod of the head. Blade Runner, the estimation of it has only continued to grow as the years have gone forth. I think it is one of the greatest movies ever made. It's so difficult to compare films, not even so much across time, but across genres. How can I compare James Cameron's Aliens, James Cameron's Terminator 2, sci-fi, right? Just sci-fi action. How do you compare them to Blade Runner? Well, Blade Runner asks more questions that stay with us. If we're open to such things, if you just want to be entertained, you can watch this movie. Just allow yourself to be absorbed by the story. You don't have to stress over the big questions. When you start thinking about what Ridley Scott, the world that he and his team created, and all of the questions this film throws at its audience, it's a lot. It's a real lot. Movies don't become iconic by accident. Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo was a significant disappointment at the box office. But as the years went by, more and more people found it. The film theoretician Robin Wood was the first to say, everybody missed the boat on this. This might be the greatest film ever made. Well, Robin Wood eventually ended up being proven right. Most film scholars and historians rank Vertigo as not only the best film Hitchcock ever made, top 5 greatest movies in history. I don't share those thoughts, but I can argue in favor of them if you want. I've studied that movie in detail. I understand why it's considered as it is, just as Citizen Kane will always finish in the top 10 in Sight and Sounds polling. Blade Runner became a cult. It gained a massive cult following. I read a book called Cult Movies 3 in the 80s by Danny Perry, very good author. And movies like, Rocky Horror Picture Show, Blue Velvet is one of the movies in Cult Movies 3. Blue Velvet was, obviously it's not sci-fi, but that's also a film that's very polarizing. And to this day, there are a lot of people that say this film is disgraceful and should never have been made, as Roger Ebert famously argued. And then there are other people who say, this is maybe 2 or 3 greatest movies ever made, Blue Velvet. Great art is seldom palatable or easily palatable. Blade Runner is a movie that many people think sucks. It's boring as shit. It's not engaging. The characters are deadly dull. Nothing happens. That's a matter of opinion. That's what makes a horse race. What I say is the best. You might say, bro, I could name 100 science fiction films better than Blade Runner off the top of my head. No problem. I am of the opinion, though, it is the best science fiction film ever made. And I didn't like the Ryan Gosling film. Looked great. Terrific to see Harrison back as Rick Deckard. I don't know which Blade Runner universe that Rick Deckard is from. If we want to go multiversal here, my perception is that he's the Rick Deckard who is probably not a robot. I don't know. Spoiler alert. That film left me cold. Beautiful movie. Performances were on point. Didn't work. I saw it once. I have no interest in ever seeing it again. Blade Runner, I could watch once a week. Great art. But 42 years of Blade Runner. And there have been other pieces of pop culture. I should point out, Rob Zombie, now the horror filmmaker of the Halloween reboot, among many very successful horror films. Rob Zombie was an enormous fan of Blade Runner. And his 1994 hit song, it was his biggest hit by far. It's an anthem. It's an iconic sound from the 1990s. More Human Than Human. That's the name of the song. Do we think that's a coincidence? No. It's from Blade Runner. When a movie starts influencing later generations, when a movie is shifting the culture simply by its existence. In blackjack, we call that deck penetration. Same kind of concept. A film becomes imbued into the cultural consciousness. Blade Runner, that didn't happen at first. But by the 90s, it was happening. More human than human is our motto. Not a coincidence, not an accident. It hit the zeitgeist. People who had missed it, like me, missed the point or just didn't see it. Wow, we really slept on this one. But there is a video game based on the movie Blade Runner. It came out in the 1997 era. It might be the single best video game I've ever played. So it's set during the time of Blade Runner, when the movie was produced. I don't think there were rumors that you could see Harrison Ford in certain scenes as Rick Deckard, but you play a different Blade Runner named Ray McCoy. But a lot of the locations from the movie were used in the game. And Vangelis' incredible musical score was also used in the game. You can enjoy the game without having seen the movie. But it's a similar thing where it's not an exciting video game. It's like the movie. It's slow. You have to be paying attention to various clues. And you meet a bunch of people who were in and from the movie. Sean Young as Rachel. She didn't make the final cut. She shot scenes. The real Sean Young shot scenes for the video game, but they didn't make the final cut. But it has a very similar plot line, only depending on, it's sort of a nod and a wink at the original movie, depending on the decisions you make, either your character is a replicant or he's not. Just as in the movie, if you watch the theatrical version or the international cut of Blade Runner, Deckard's human. If you watch Ridley Scott's intended director's cut or final cut, it's pretty clear that he's not more human than human. He's not human at all. Blade Runner, directed by Ridley Scott, starring Harrison Ford, Sean Young, the late great M. Emmett Walsh, Brian James, Joanna Cassidy, Daryl Hannah, William Sanderson, Rutger Hauer, and Joe Turkel as Eldon Tyrell, released on this day, 1982. This has been episode 225 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your happy hump day with me here in New York. If you checked out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 226 real soon. Until then, peace.